Okay. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Steph. So good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Leeper. I'm the city councilor for the neighborhood. And obviously you're here this evening to take a look at the 255 Richmond Road proposal. This is a mixed use building where the Whispers is and several adjacent properties. So you'll have a chance to take a look at exactly which properties are in play here. The open house is really your opportunity to ask questions, find out more about the proposal. This is a long process and I'm looking forward to receiving your feedback in the weeks ahead. A couple of folks who are here with me tonight. Steve Gauthier is here with the city. Steve, I take it, is the lead planner on the file. And so he is here to, listen to the tenor of the questions and some of the concerns that are raised. And we'll be dealing extensively with him over the next several months on this proposal. And I'm going to turn it over now to Stephanie. Stephanie is my planning assistant. I'm sure by now many of you have seen her hosting our open houses. So Steph, I'll let you take it away, please.
Sounds good. So just to do the usual and the quick housekeeping for everybody, the way this meeting will go, as Jeff has said, but if anyone has come in the meantime, we'll start this off by having the applicants do a pretty sort of tight presentation, about 15-20 minutes, about their entire package, giving a quick rundown about the building and all the information that might be relevant to people. You can find most of these documents on DevApps right now, and we'll put that link in at the end. After that, we're going to go to Q&A. So what we would ask everyone to do is, you can see on the bottom of your screen, you've got the little Q&A box. We're going to have the chat disabled. So we ask that you put all of your questions into the Q&A, and we'll just be able to triage them easiest to the applicants that way. If there are any concerns or issues, though, that come up, as you're trying to put any questions in there, I'd ask that you use the raise hand function. So that's also on the bottom of your screen to the right if you're on a PC or Mac. If you have any questions, you can also direct it directly to us and we'll be able to help you answer them. Just to give everyone the heads up, we are recording this entire meeting. We're going to post it publicly on our Kitchissippi Ward YouTube, probably tomorrow to latest end of the week. So if anyone was interested in seeing the discussion that happens tonight and couldn't make it, I'll be able to send it over to them and you can reach out to our office and we can provide you with that, or just look up Kitchissippi Ward on YouTube and you'll be able to find it there. But just so everyone knows, you're going to be recorded. We'll be repeating your questions to people, so just be aware of that. If you want to keep your video off, you can, but no panelists should be coming up on video anyways. So just so everyone's aware. So with that said, I'll turn it over to the applicants to begin their presentation and their introduction, if you guys want to take it away.
Thank you, Steph, and thank you, Councillor Leeper. Thank you very much to the public for joining with us tonight to look at this project. And we put a lot of work into this. And with us tonight is Victor Minash from White Street Properties, Wright Street Capital, pardon me. And Victor will give us an overview on the development program and from their perspective. Gada Zaki is with Fulton Planning Consultants. Brad Bybal is with Doatech Traffic Engineering. And I'm Vincent Klitza, the architect. So I'll turn it over to Victor.
Well, thank you, Vince. Thank you, Councillor Leeper. We're delighted to be here with the community. And this project started, frankly, with the community. We started out early in 2017, 2018, literally knocking on doors within the neighborhood, looking for property to acquire. And the feedback that we kept getting consistently, which has only been amplified in the last 18 months, is, we were looking to acquire property. And the feedback was always, well, I would love to sell. I know I can get a great dollar value for my property, but as soon as I sell, I have to leave the neighborhood because there's really nowhere for me to go. So that's why very few properties are selling. Folks that have a 4 or 5 bedroom house in Westboro, in Hintonburg, they really have no place to go. They're not going to downsize into a 650 square foot apartment with a bedroom that measures, 8 feet by 10 feet. There isn't even room to put your furniture. And so a lot of people are simply electing not to sell. There's no transition path for someone looking to downsize within within the neighborhood that's really viable, that's really tailored to that current resident. Yeah, you can sell your property for $1.2 million, maybe $1.7 million, but where are you going to go? And so this building was designed specifically for that resident. And it's, for folks that currently live in the community. So the units are larger. They have the amenities that we think are tailored to folks that are already part of Westboro, that want the look and feel of Westboro. And so as you'll see when we go into the details of the design, when Vince Kalitza, our architect, goes through the details, hopefully you'll see that we're trying to maintain the look and feel and the community spirit of Westboro. And it's a mixed use building. So we're trying to animate Richmond Road. Richmond Road has a problem in that it's a very walkable street, but there are gaps and there's a lack of continuity. And we aim to bridge that continuity between, what's now the superstore at one end and, some of the best restaurants and shops on Richmond Road. And we envision doing that with that storefront space. And we'll go through that in more detail once we get into it. So with that, let me turn it over to Vince.
Okay, and I'll turn it over to Gada to bring us up to how she's looked at the planning framework and the OP and so on.
Thank you so much. So as Vince mentioned, I'm a planner with Photon Consultants, and we were doing the planning work for this file. So I'll just provide a bit of context before we start. The subject property is located on the north side of Richmond Road on the west side of Tweedsmuir Avenue. It's in the Westboro neighborhood, as Victor mentioned. And the development lands consist of a land assembly of 3 parcels that are contiguous. And they're municipally known as 249 Richmond, 255 Richmond, and lastly, 372 Tweedsmuir. And together, these properties are L-shaped, which you'll see when I go to the next slide. I just, in a bit of context, so north of the subject property is generally characterized by a mix of low-density residential uses. And there's also the planned Westboro LRT station that's located 1 block north along Scott Street. And it's within 300 meters walking distance of the property. East is a 1-story car dealership. There's also southeast, a 9-story mid-rise mixed-use building that includes retail at grade and residential uses above. So that also informed our design today, which Vince will touch on. And then if we just go into the policy quickly, as you could see as part of Schedule B on the left here, this is the land use plan of the City of Ottawa current and I guess old official plan until the new one does get ministerial approval. The site is designated, if you go back, sorry, 1 slide, Vince, traditional Main Street. And within the traditional Main Street, pedestrian-oriented environments are encouraged and also low and mid-rise building heights. So the proposal is, of course, consistent with the official plan. We're also within the Richmond Road Westboro secondary plan, and we're within the Westboro Village planning sector. And so while development heights of 4 to 6 stories are specified on the schedule, the subject property does have, there's permission for consideration of greater building heights if there's some things that are done to the proposal. And so one of those is if it conforms to building heights that are similar to those in the area, which we had just mentioned is the case. And if the development fosters the creation of a community focus where it's on a corner lot, which is our case as well. And as Vince will say, we are providing community focus as well. If we just go to the next slide. So this is the new OP that's been adopted by council, but not yet approved by the minister. But we still need to have regard for it. And so we are within the inner urban transect and the Main Street corridor designation. And so similarly to the old OP, pedestrian-oriented environments are encouraged and low to mid-rise heights as well. And The Richmond Road Westboro secondary plan in our case stays pretty similar. So we are consistent with the policy framework for the new official plan as well. We just go to the next slide. So here we've got the zoning of the site. It's split zoned on the south side, and the parcels that are addressed as 249 and 255 Richmond, it's zoned traditional Main Street with a maximum built height of 15 meters. And then on north at 372 Tweedsmuir, it's zoned residential fourth density. And so the intent of this proposal is to rezone the entire property to traditional Main Street with a building height of 31 meters. There's also a few amendments that we're seeking permission for. Some include setback, so the corner side yard setback along Tweedsmuir, and then the rear setback. And then we're seeking amendments for the landscaped area. So there's a certain area that needs to be landscaped. Another amendment has to do with permitted projections. And then the last one is the drive aisle width. So we're seeking something a bit less than. So I can also go into more detail about the specific amendments that we're seeking later on, but I'll pass it over to Vince to discuss the proposal and how we got to the design that we have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Gata. So we did an intense survey of the neighborhood, looked at housing along Athlone, housing along Tweedsmuir, the car dealership, what's happening to the street, how it's starting to transition over time now as we're moving forward. And we were involved in the building across the street in the southeast corner. So we had a fairly good sense of how to deal with the streetscape, the widened sidewalks, and how to approach the massing. So what we did was we have images here, and I'll go through them very quickly just so you got a sense of what these views are. One looking southward up Tweedsmuir, and the south side of Tweedsmuir don't completely align, but they're very close, as well as looking down Richmond Road from the west towards the east. Existing Whispers, how Whispers is facing the Subaru dealership, and how Whispers has a side yard development for an outdoor patio space. The building on the southeast corner. In that instance, we looked at how we would deal with the ground plane, how we deal with the public realm, how we would try to associate the base of the building with outdoor spaces that are more active to animate the street. So again, some further images which are in the presentation that you have access to. So on Athlone, we looked at what has recently been built. There's some 3.5-story infill, and what is the interface between the property to our west and the first property on Athlone 369 as to what is the condition along that edge. And of course, the retail further east of the property and how the views towards the dealership and past the liquor store. So we talk about transition. So when we talk about urban design objectives, we talk about reinforcing the pedestrian experience, animating the street, integrating with the urban fabric. The building must present a principal entrance to Richmond Road and to Tweedsmuir Avenue in this case, which is on the right-hand side of this diagram. And the massing must transition from the street level to increase setbacks for the residential above the ground floor retail. So this diagram gives you a sense of how we laid out an initial program to address what we thought were a responsible design from an urban design perspective, and how we should transition through the R4 property to the adjacent R4 properties on both the rear north end of the property at the Dogleg and as well as to 369 Athlone. So we placed large setbacks, and we looked at how we're going to deal with the building itself and how we could deal with the public realm in terms of how the retail frontage would face Richmond Road and widen the sidewalk. So we started to slowly integrate more of setbacks, a diagram that gives you some sense of how we could deal with where the transition should occur and how the transition will play out as you see further into the presentation. We then prepared sections through the building and through the site, which gives you a real strong sense of how the transition and massing starts to take place with respect to the notion of transition. So you can see this is just an overall study that gives you a sense of the terracing on the north side or above the R4 site. We started out with an R4-story building, reduced it to 3 stories at the northern portion of the site, and worked our way upwards towards the larger body facing Richmond Road with some setbacks along what is a terrace at the back of the building adjacent to the Athlone property. So these are the studies that we started looking at in terms of how the rear yard facing Athlone should relate in terms of height and an angular plane, how it should relate to Richmond Road with step backs above the retail, step backs above the 7th floor, and tucking the 8th and 9th floor further into the building body to reduce the impact of the street. Likewise, on the cross section, we looked at the west side and the east side along Tweedsmuir, stepping back again above the 7th floor. And in case of the R4 property, you'll see section B addresses the notion of an angular plane, stepping back above the 3rd floor to a 4th floor, 5th floor, 6th floor, and so on. And likewise, the lower section of the R4 site in section D, which shows step backs both from Tweedsmuir and from the rear yard of the Athlone property, so that we increase the setback beyond the bylaw. So this gives you the first massing model that we prepared that gave you a real sense of what we can do to really improve the scale, the massing of the building in terms of the R4 property, starting at the 3rd floor level, stepping to 4, 5, 6, 7, eventually up to the 8th and 9th floor. Again, towards the west side, which is the right side of the model, we terraced it as well above the 5th floor, 6th and 7th, up to the 8th and 9th. This diagram gives you a sense of how we handle the public realm, the landscaped areas, and how we wanted to deal with the plan of the building itself, how the building faces, the retail component of the building faces Richmond Road, a terrace at the base, Richmond Road for a restaurant in the corner, the side yard along Tweedsmuir, how we could address some terracing, some street trees, entrance into the residential lobby for the building, and the entrance into the garage itself. And the R4 site where we looked at front yard, a landscape front yard, we stepped the footprint of the building further into the property with more of a setback from Tweedsmuir to transition to the existing property north of the site. So this massing diagram gives you a real strong sense of how the retail at the base of the building wraps around the corner. It's set back to the residential and then further set back on 8 and 9, both along Richmond Road and along Tweedsmuir on the side yard above the 7th floor. And the transition, as you see above the 4th floor, 3rd floor on the component that faces the R4 property. An interior view looking north southeast, again, gives you a better sense of the building itself, the building facade, the treatment, the glazing, keep the building light in character, and the massing, reducing the massing by dealing with the terracing and the scaling of the rooftop setbacks. Further view from Tweedsmuir looking southwest, pardon me, and you see the terracing down towards the 3-story component, the entrance to the 3-story building off of Tweedsmuir for the residential entrance, and the main entrance above the garage opening there along Tweedsmuir to get into the residential lobby. Shadow studies indicate that there is sufficient daylight throughout the year in terms of summer and fall. And of course, December, it's a different story, as with all properties. This roof plan highlights the actual physical dimensions of all the setbacks to all the property lines in both directions. So there's setbacks from the R4 site towards each step, each floor, setbacks from the rear yard against the rear of the Athlone property, setbacks to the terraces along the western portion body of the building, the terraces up to 6, 7, and 8. And likewise, the heavy blue color or the lighter blue color is the 8th and 9th floor with terracing setbacks against Tweedsmuir and against Richmond Road. So this elevation along Tweedsmuir Avenue gives you a sense of where the residential lobby is, the garage entrance for the vehicular access to the lower parking levels, the R4 property, because we tried to treat the intent was to treat the R4 property, or the portion of the site was R4, although it's being zoned to TM, was to try and treat it like an R4. And so we looked at how we could take essentially a component that was permitted to be roughly 3.5 stories, how we could articulate that in 3 stories and step it back up to the body of the main building, and that there's a smoother transition from the lower level to the upper level, and step the 8th and 9th floors considerably back from the rear yard. Facing Richmond Road, we've looked at what we call a base or podium level, a body, and what we also call a hat or top section of the building. So the base of the building is projecting towards Richmond Road. Each of the retail entrances is stepped back underneath an overhang so that there's a wider sidewalk, a greater experience along there, and the openings to the restaurant component on the corner are recessed with a future patio. And the body of the building for the first 5 floors of residential are treated as a body with a cornice, which has a bit of a strong projection to emphasize and use the cornice as a scale element to bring down the scale of the building, with the 8th and 9th floors in a lighter material considerably set back from the street. Looking southward from the R4 portion of the building, you see a 3-story component with a terrace and terraces that step all the way up to the 6th and 7th and 8th floors and 9th floors. Likewise at that section, as well as the western portion, which is the right-hand side, you'll see terracing there that steps up above the 5th floor. Looking from the west side elevation, which is adjacent to the property along Richmond Road, we have limited windows because of the building code, and the terracing you can see from 5 to 6 to 7 and up to 8 and 9 above. And you can see in the distance, the terracing above the R4 site facing Tweedsmuir Avenue. So in terms of building materials, we looked at how we would lighten up the massing of the building, the weight of the building, by looking at a lightweight material on 8 and 9, a body which is essentially masonry, a base which can be more of a stone-like masonry with some canopies for supporting signage and providing some articulation of the facade along the street front to allow for more an interesting experience along the street, as well as if you look closely along the Tweedsmuir frontage, you'll see some terracing off of the side of the building with street trees running down the street, as well as the setback for the 4-story component, the 3-story component on the R4 site. These images here just give you a bit of a more massing studies that we had undertaken, where we looked at, again, very, very critically and very carefully at the R4 site as to how we can deal with a height, a roof overhang that gives a strong scale element to bring down the scale to be more in line with the street and the future development rights of the sites next to us, which are essentially the same. That's the rear terrace in the lower right-hand corner that gives you a sense from the back of the building out onto the terrace. The floor elevation from Richmond Road comes straight out to the rear yard, and this terrace is sitting essentially at the same level as the ground floor. The lower left-hand corner image gives you a bit of an impression of how we intend to deal with a future patio for the restaurant. And so there'd be maybe possibly 2 bays of terracing along there, and we'd have a temporary license to operate a terrace there. So here's where we prepared images where we embedded the actual image of the building into the street photographs, and it gives you a sense looking westward in front of the Subaru dealership, and how this building would relate to the street and how it sits within the street, and the separation between buildings from one side of the street to the other. The scale elements of the base of the building being a podium, the body and the upper levels being set back, and a lighter weight material. Again, looking eastward from Athlone and Richmond gives you a sense of how the building is stepped back from the retail level, which is considerable, to the face of the residential levels from 2, 3, 4 and upward, and likewise the upper levels. Looking southward along along Tweedsmuir, we embedded this image into the street photo to give you a sense of how this building will relate to the neighboring properties adjacent to the site on the north side, and how we intend to deal with the landscaping, the pedestrian experience along the side of the street and upwards as you walk towards Richmond. Again, the Richmond view, which gives you a strong sense of how the gas station relates to this site, how the neighboring retail relates to the site, the Subaru dealership on the other side. We're talking Ottawa Hydro right now about burying some of those hydro lines along Tweedsmuir. And we're looking at how we could address the street corner, not in just terms of scale and material, but in terms of form and how it addresses it in terms of it expresses and reinforces the street corner. These floor plans are simply, and I'll go through them very quickly, because it just gives you a real sense when you scroll through this, how we start to address the setbacks. This is a cross section showing the ramp system through from Tweedsmuir into the garage levels, and how the portion of the building on the TM site is the elevation of it, the northward elevation. So there's 3 levels of underground parking. Then there's the ground floor, second, third floor. And then we start terracing above the 3rd floor. And then now you start seeing the terracing as we head up to the 8th and 9th floor. So there's a considerable amount of setbacks on this building to reduce the mass. And then just to give you an idea of what else is in the neighborhood, there's a 10-story down at the corner of Golden and Richmond, which starts to articulate the building setback and the ground floor retail components. So it's this strategy and approach to urban design is how we've chosen to address this site. Thank you very much. So if there's any questions, I think maybe we do have Brad Byfeld here from Novatech Engineering on the transportation side, so we can speak to issues relative to traffic and any issues relative to planning or architecture. We'd be delighted to respond to you.
Awesome. In that case, we'll open up the floor to the Q&A. We've got a few questions already, but feel free to keep them coming. Just to actually, I think it might be good to touch on the traffic concerns, and we do have a question in the chat about it. So KH does ask, what, if anything, will be done to address traffic concerns regarding traffic turning onto Richmond Road from Tweedsmuir? That intersection is already effectively blind because of parking that exists in front of the car dealership. And I can only imagine it would be greatly exacerbated by placing the garage entrance on Tweedsmuir. If Novatech would like to tackle that one.
Hi. Yeah, I guess to talk about a little bit about traffic. Overall, this development is located in close proximity to the Westboro Transit Station and is considered a transit-oriented development. The overall traffic volumes generated by this site are actually going to be comparable to existing traffic generated by the various uses on site today. As far as the intersection in itself and sight lines, the city parking on that side of the street in front of the car dealership, so that's a city on-street parking space. We haven't proposed any modifications to that. However, we have reviewed collision history in our traffic impact assessment. We typically look at the collision history over the last 5 years, and based on this intersection, there is no real significant collision history. I think the most amount of collisions where there was 4 angle impacts over the last 5 years, of which there was 2 southbound vehicles that were involved. That's not anything that raises any significant concerns as far as potential sightline issues or safety concerns at the intersection. As far as the on-street parking space, the city could consider removing 1 space to help increase those sight lines, but that's a City of Ottawa parking mandate. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett. Going to the next question I'm seeing in the Q&A from Kathy, who asks, why would you ask for / expect approval of a building that is 50% higher than what the OP currently allows? If someone would like to speak to that.
Sure, I can take a stab at that. Thanks, Kathy, for your question. So The OP does say that traditional main streets are permitted to have low and mid-rise building heights. And mid-rise heights kind of stop at 9 stories, according to the City of Ottawa. So anything above 9 stories is a high rise. So we are within that mid-rise range. If you're talking about the secondary plan, yes, heights between 4 to 6 stories are also contemplated for the subject property. However, there's a policy in the secondary plan, so it's policy 1.3.3. Specifically says that greater heights are permitted without the need for an official plan amendment if the proposed building height conforms with prevailing building heights. So that's the case with the southeast corner where we have building heights of 9 stories already there. And if the building provides transition to existing buildings, which I think Vince explained is happening quite a bit actually, especially towards Tweedsmuir and Athlone Avenue. And also if the development fosters the creation of a community focus where the proposal is on a corner lot or a gateway location and where there's opportunities to support transit. And so in our case, we're 1 block south of transit and rapid transit at that. And so we are supporting that. And also there is the community focus that's created. I don't know, if, Vince, if you want to go into more detail about that patio space that we're contemplating for this design. There is an attempt to create that community focus. And so there are quite a few reasons why we would contemplate greater building heights and it would conform to the official plan. We're not seeking an official plan amendment per se for this application.
Yeah, it's a matter of how you handle the increase in height. So if you handle it properly through transition in terms of building step backs, particularly you can see here that the front elevation for the retail at the base of the building facing Richmond is, the body of the building is set back significantly from the street edge. And again, the 8th and 9th floors. So you have to work at how you can come up with a solution that reduces that, but also addresses the fact you've got a program to follow. You want to try and provide services and residential opportunity to the community as well. So this is how we chose to do it. And if you look closely, you'll see the 8th and 9th floors have been diminished significantly from the body of the lower level, the mid-level, and the lower level retail is quite pronounced. So from a massing perspective, you're looking from a bird's eye perspective, but from the street perspective, you don't really sense it the same way as you do from these images here. But I mean, the intent here is what you can see from these section studies that we undertook to break down the massing. So you may talk about an increase in height, but where is the height? Height has been pushed towards Richmond Road, away from the neighborhood, and been centralized at the front of the property for the upper 2 floors. I think that's sort of, there's another question related to that, I'd be delighted to answer.
Got it. Thank you so much for the answer, Vince. To go on to the next question that I'm seeing from Heather Mitchell, who asks, why do you need relief from the 45-degree and angular plane? I feel that the design and relief you're asking for puts the building much too close to residential properties. And also, will you have real trees in your landscaping plans?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of it. The real trees, you said?
Yeah, real trees in the landscaping plans. I'm not sure if that means sort of renderings.
Yeah, they're real trees. What we did here, let me see if I can find the landscape plan. Yeah. These trees, for example, along the street edge here are all real trees. There's existing trees along Richmond Road, and these trees here, the lower level garage only extends to about this point here. So there's a full root ball in these trees along here. Any trees that are in planters of any fashion, the size of the planter has been designed to accommodate a full root ball. So there's no issue there. And the first part of your question was dealing with the angular plane. So what we attempted to do here was, if you look at this section, for example, the site is only so much depth. So you start to look at this angular plane, how we can terrace within the angular plane. About an 8 and 9, we have a corridor and we want to get some suites facing the street. So this full floor plate would have extended obviously out to this distance here if we're dealing in a double loaded corridor with suites on either side. So we took the angular plane up to the point of roughly 15 meters. The property has a over, I don't know, about 1.8 meter fall along Tweedsmuir Avenue. So Richmond Road sits up here and the neighboring property sits about here. So when you look at, for example, the Tweedsmuir section, you'll see the angular plane taken from that magical 15 meters. But again, Richmond Road is sitting up higher. So you can't quite conform when you've got an angle for the base of the ground floor when the ground floor essentially runs right through. So we took a point, a reasonable point, and then looked at terracing within that angular plane, and it works for parts of it. In other parts, there's a little bit of an intrusion for part of the 9th floor, and that's it. Thanks, Steph.
Got it. Thank you, Vince. To sort of touch on a sort of prevailing question I'm seeing in the Q&As right now too, which is if this is a transit-oriented development, or given the proximity of the development to transit, why is there so much parking? Not sure if Photon would like to take that or someone else, but to sort of touch on that point.
It's an interesting.
Why don't I take that one? So when we looked at parking, we looked at who the target client is for this particular building. And these are folks that are living in the existing neighborhood. Many of them have 2 cars today. We expect as they move into, as they're downsizing, moving into a building like this, they're probably going to go down to 1 car. Very unlikely that they're going to go down to 0. Of course, it is being transit oriented. We expect people to use public transit, and the proximity to the light rail is a fantastic amenity. But for this particular client base, we felt it was important to maintain something approaching a parking ratio of 1. Now, as part of that, we are also including bicycle parking at a ratio of 2 to 1. And we're also including charging stations for electric vehicles, which is, and I think there's 11 spaces for electric vehicles. That's not something that you typically find in a building, because that's a very difficult, very expensive retrofit. And we're building it in right from the ground up.
I'll leave the floor open for a moment in case anyone else want to pop in.
I'll just mention as well that within the zoning, there is a max parking for buildings close to transit, and we're not close to that by any means. So yeah, I'll just put it there. So we are within that range.
Thanks, Kevin.
And just to speak on it from a traffic perspective, although a ratio of 1-to-1 is being sought for the parking, that doesn't necessarily constitute vehicle trips generated during peak hours. Some residents might choose to own a vehicle to use on a Saturday to visit mom and dad, or to go on a special trip to the cottage or something like that during off-peak times. They choose to have a vehicle, but they choose to use public transit or alternative modes during the critical peak periods throughout the week, and they would like to have a vehicle for certain time frames, right? So
Got it. Thank you, Fred. Just because a question basically on sort of this topic just came up too. Will there be any visitor parking in the building, / can you give people a number on the visitor parking that's planned?
Yes, there is visitor parking. We've provided 1-for-1 roughly for the suites. There's 87 suites. I think we have about 99 stalls in the garage. So we have an excess of about 10 cars, 12 cars, which would be dedicated to visitor parking.
So according to the bylaw, we're required to provide 8 visitor parking spaces, and that's what I have as the number that we're providing right now.
Correct,
So
8 stalls. Yeah.
Exact. number that's required as per the bylaw.
Yeah, and we haven't quite sorted out our retail yet. There may be 1 or 2 stalls required for that. Maybe not, depends on how it breaks out relative to the bylaw.
Got it, thank you. To move on to the next question, Anonymous asks, how many units will this development provide, and will there be any accommodations for affordable housing units?
There's a total of 87 units, and we're looking at a condominium. So we are not, we have some smaller units. Let me see if I can find the typical floor. I'm not sure it's here. Let me see. It's in the presentation. No, not yet. Let me go back. Oh, we've got a residential floor on here. In any event, the floor plates, there we go. The suites on the west end of the building, the 1 bedroom, in fact, because this happens to be a 2 bedroom because there's one facing the west wall further into the building. But these suites in here are 1 bedrooms in a den. So there are suites that are more affordable rather than the larger suites that, you know, take on certainly more square footage and are larger suites. And some of the larger suites are kept up in the 8th and 9th floors, whereas the affordable suites are sort of in the typical floor from about this point that way. So there are a number of 1 bedrooms and 1 bedrooms in a den, as well as some small 2s. And then there's larger suites as well.
Just because I see this in another question too, will there be 3 bedroom units / do you know how many 3 bedroom larger units you have planned?
At the moment, we haven't addressed the notion of 3 bedroom suites. Typically, we've been involved in some other buildings along Richmond, and we've had requests for people who gang units together. And sometimes they want to have a 3 bedroom unit, and that changes the 2 bedroom next door to that unit to a 1 bedroom, and then we end up with a 3 bedroom unit. So it can transition into some suites that are larger with 3s, but generally speaking, there isn't a huge demand for that, but that's a possibility.
Got it, thank you. Seeing another comment from, I think, both Lauren and one of the anonymous questions we got. I'll read one of them, but they're speaking to the same point. At the risk of being overly critical, I cannot help but be disappointed by the sheer lack of unique character of the proposed building. It looks entirely too similar to the mid-rises that were already along Richmond, including across the street. This is especially apparent considering the buildings that will be demolished are the oldest in Westboro. Why was this design language reused rather than coming up with something new? / is this a placeholder design, or is there sort of room to move in reconsidering, you know, the design at site plan?
Could I ask you, Steph, if you could repeat that a little bit louder, please?
No problem. No problem at all. So essentially speaking to the character of the proposed buildings and how similar they look to the similar mid-rises along Richmond, including across the street. And someone says that they're disappointed that this design language was reused. And Lauren also said, is this design going to change in the future, or is the design as it stands going to be, you know, what you go with going forward?
No, the design may change in the future. We took the design so far to this level of approvals, and then we've had comments back from the Urban Design Review Panel. We have other things internally where we wanted to re-examine certain solutions along the outside facade, and how we might be able to deal with the corner as well in another way. The side view along Tweedsmuir, we were looking at a re-examination of that as well. And I understand the comment about similarity, and we're definitely going to eliminate that issue, but we're certainly going to address that issue is what I meant to say. And I think we'll definitely come back with another refinement on this solution.
Thank you, Vince. to go to the next question I'm seeing, which is your presentation referred to the 10-story mid-rise at Golden and Richmond, as well as to the building on the southwest corner of Tweedsmuir and Richmond Road. These two buildings appear to have the necessary setbacks. Why can't your building respect the required setbacks for the neighbors on Tweedsmuir and Athlone?
Well, that's a product of the depth of the site. Goldman and Richmond had a deeper property. So the retail footprint at the base could project out further. I'm familiar with that building because at one point I was working with that firm. And so we have a site of a certain depth. And so what we did was we optimized the step back above the retail to the base of the residential. I mean, at the west end of the building, there's probably close to a 20-foot setback there, or 15-foot setback. As the site tapers, let me see if I can find a site plan here for you a second. Just give me a minute. Okay, here we go. So if you look at the skewed front property line of the site facing Richmond Road and the rear yard that is perpendicular between the Tweedsmuir frontage and essentially the Athlone frontage is a straight property line across there. So this is the depth we're working with. We're working with the 7.5 meter setback here, and we're working with how and what way can we transition along the street front, not just for the retail, but for the residential, the main body of the building. And then how do we step back 8 and 9? So there's quite a bit of setback here because we have more depth. So the building at Richmond and Golden had much more depth to the property. In fact, it was more something like this sort of a site. So they could take the body of the building and slide it back. So the retail projected a little further out than it does here, but we're approaching the same sort of setbacks here at Richmond and Golden on this component of the building here. But because of that skewed property line, we have to work with it. We have to terrace across the front to try and stagger the building frontage along the retail, add some interest, deepen the sidewalk widths, and deal with the setbacks the best we could.
Got it. And sort of a semi-similar question coming from Anonymous as well. Does it not seem wholly inappropriate to have such a large portion of such a large building placed on a residential street? Can you speak to the rationale behind that move?
Such a large portion facing a residential street, is that what I captured?
So why is there such a large portion of such a large building that's being placed on a residential street?
Okay, well, the zoning is TM. So this is your TM zoning that's in place right now. Portion that was originally R4 is this portion. So as I mentioned, we treated the R4 with increased front yard setback, further setbacks to the upper terracing of the floors above, setbacks for each of the floors from the north property line to essentially break down this portion of the building as it's completely adjacent to an R4U, which could have essentially a 3.5-story building right here, effectively the same length with the same setback of 7.5 meters. It could effectively, it's as of right, would have something like this. So we basically treated this portion as its adjacency to reduce the height and the scale of this. So I think I feel the scale of this building facing the residential street is quite minimal. This facade is very similar in terms of most other sites where we have a 7-story base and an 8th and 9th floor. In this case, oddly enough, we actually have an 8-story building because the 9th floor, if you will, was buried in a 2nd floor that we're able to capture because of the retail being a 2-story, basically a 20-foot height limit on this 2-story base. So because Tweedsmuir is dropping along the side elevation, I'm going to try and find it. Here we go. So as Tweedsmuir drops heading north, we're able to slip in behind the retail 2-story portion, a 2nd floor here. So the height of the building relative to Richmond is really an 8-story building. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the ground floor 8. The building across the street is actually 9 stories, which one extra floor above the retail component, which is effectively the same height. So this is where we call it a 9-story building because we're able to take advantage of that slope and deal with a second floor that is really only single loaded on one side of the plate. So, I mean, the treatment of this basically breaks down the scale relative to the adjacency in terms of its future as of right. And you can see what's been infilling along Athlone. The same sort of as of right exists on the Athlone frontage. So the scale, I think, is appropriate. I think the body using some lightweight with glass, a stronger residential base with a body and an entry level treatment at the base of the building is a nice transition from the main body of the building as you head north along Tweedsmuir.
Just to add to that, I think that if we weren't rezoning and the depth of the property does allow for this transition, if there was actually another residential unit that was on 372 Tweedsmuir, it would kind of be up against like a sheer wall of high mid-rise building, whereas this creates and it kind of softens that transition. So in this case, the depth of the site does provide quite a bit of advantage to the low-rise residential units.
Perfect. Thank you, Gavin. To move on to the next question in the Q&A from Lauren Cutler, who asks, one of the impacts of the pandemic has been the importance of outdoor space for restaurants. This building is going to replace a restaurant with significant outdoor space, 2 patios and a rooftop. Why are you designing something that has such a modest outdoor space when it will only allow for a few tables? You have a pizza shop across the street in a similarly designed building, which has a minuscule patio space, and this building appears to be very similar. I leave that to whoever would like to tackle it.
I can tackle that one. So the restaurant space is being designed with a curtain wall that is on 2 tracks, one at the perimeter of the building and one that's set back on the interior. So during the warm summer months, we can reduce the air conditioned space and have outdoor space within the cantilever of the building itself without having to encroach into the public realm. So, I mean, it's possible that a few tables at the restaurant operator at some point in the future may wish to apply to the city to put a few tables in the public space. But as of now, there's not a need to do that at all within the existing design. We have significant outdoor space by moving that glass wall inboard inside the building.
Yeah, does anyone else want to comment? I heard a voice go before, so I want to leave the floor open just in case.
So this isn't specifically pertaining to restaurants, but the development, I mean, we're required to provide 522 square meters of amenity area within the development, but we're providing 4 times that, so 2,000 square meters of amenity space within the proposal itself. So there will be quite a bit of amenity area provided as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Gavin. To go on to the next question that I'm seeing in the chat, which we might want Steve to help with this one. So Kathy asks, has anyone at the city completed an overall count of units that have been added to the housing stock or are in the works within close proximity to this proposal? I can see at least 2 26-story buildings on McRae Scott, 2 30-story buildings on Scott near Winona, another development at Scott and Churchill, not sure the number of stories, a 29-story on Clifton, a 9-story and 6 on Kirkwood, Richmond, another development at Superstore Byron. This does not include infills. Just to throw it out there, maybe Steve, it might be best for you to take this.
No such assessment has been done. I'm taking note of it, but no such assessment has been done.
Yeah, and there's a distinction between condominium and rental. there is a demand for both of them. We're dealing with a small building here of 87 units, whereas a lot of the rental buildings have been on sites where the density has been significantly increased to and the height because of the transit proximity. So we're seeing that ourselves in locations where there's been a demand for more rental housing, and the province is encouraging that. And there are federal programs through CMHC that are encouraging that from a finance perspective. So that's why you're seeing a lot of high-rise residential. And I guess from a growth perspective, the marketing studies indicate that there's going to be greater demand for housing because of the influx of new residents in Ottawa. So I think that's sort of driving the marketplace. Plus you've got low interest rates as well. So all those things combined start to drive the marketplace in terms of how the housing developers are responding to those opportunities and factors that actually encourage and support multi-res housing.
Kathy, I'll just say it's probably a couple thousand. You know, obviously we've seen a whack of towers go in, dozens and dozens of infills that have replaced detached homes with semis, in some cases triplexes. But this is not unexpected in light of the direction in which the last official plan went. And I anticipate that given the direction of the new official plan, that it will only continue. We are running out of spaces in Kitchissippi. And what you're starting to see is that the intensification is now starting to go into other wards. So we're starting to see it in Councillor Kavanaugh's ward, Councillor Tierney's ward, Councillor in Orleans, rapid intensification around the LRT stations. Those LRTs are driving tall, dense development in proximity to them, and in proximity to the LRT stations, we're also seeing intensification at the low-rise scale as well. And this is just a natural function of the growth management strategy that Ottawa has set itself upon. We need to fit about 400,000 new people in Ottawa in the course of the next 25 years. That's a lot of people. And in order not to expand into the natural areas and the agricultural lands, half of that intensification is going to be accommodated in areas that are already built up and serviced. And of that, the provincial policy statement and our new official plan says that most of it, the tallest, densest developments are going to be near LRT, of which Kitchissippi has, what, 7 stations? When you count if you want to count Bayview in there, plus the 2 stations that are down on the O train line too. So they don't have an inventory of the number of new units, but what I would suggest to you is that neither myself nor the planning department are surprised by the level of intensification that's occurring with the transit being what it is and with our growth management strategy being what it is. What I would have liked to have seen is that our secondary plan that constrains the growth on Richmond Road for the most part to 6 stories would be adhered to. I consider that to continue to be the maximum height that we should be looking at on Richmond, and 9 stories is obviously uncomfortable. And I've conveyed that to the developer. I've also conveyed to the developer that a 1-for-1 parking ratio when we're, and I'm sorry, I'm sure they put the number in the presentation, or maybe they didn't, but we're what, 450 meters or so from Westboro Station as the crow flies, and a 1-to-1 parking ratio is surprising to me. We're not seeing those parking ratios in the multiple rental units that are going up closer to Scott Street, but they have their economics to match, and the current city policies don't give us the power to constrain it beyond a certain maximum level. So they're proposing what works for their business model. I am, of course, more than happy to chat, and I know I'll be chatting more with the community association in the days to come. But with respect to Is there too much intensification in Kitchissippi Ward? We're certainly getting close to that point, if that was, if that's what you were hoping to sort of convey, Kathy. Happy to chat anytime, and please do when I'm back from vacation, pop by and chat with me at one of my pop-ups or set some time aside.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. To jump to the next question that I'm seeing in the chat, and if just sort of as a general comment, but we're not skipping any questions. I'm just sort of trying to group together questions as when I see them. So don't worry if it seems like it's been a bit since you put it into the chat. So Judy Lincoln asks, is there secure bicycle parking for the commercial tenants on the site? If anyone can speak to that.
We have bicycle parking along the street front along Richmond. When you use the term secure, I mean, the residential parking has a lobby with a secure bicycle storage room beside it. But what you're referring to is if you're shopping along the retail front, whether there'd be a room that you can lock up and put your bike in there. We haven't addressed that. I mean, we'll take it back and look at it and see what we can do with that notion. But typically we have outdoor bicycle stalls along the street front that people lock their bikes up right in the bicycle stall.
Awesome, thank you. And just to jump to another quick question, if anyone has a number on hand, but what sort of square footage are you looking at for the units that you're offering?
Well, the units here range from probably 600 square feet, 650, to there's a few units in the 1,200 to 1,500 square foot range, but very few on the upper floor, probably on 8 and 9. Most units are sort of mid-range between 950 to, I mean, a 2-bedroom unit, a successful 2-bedroom unit's got to be somewhere around 850 to, and upwards. A 1-bedroom in a den is somewhere in the 750 to 800 range, but there are some small ones as well, smaller units that are 1-bedroom.
Perfect, thanks. And just to round back on the comment about the secure biking, Judy says that she was referring to the secure bike parking for those who work at the commercial units and not necessarily the shoppers. If you can perhaps expand on that instead.
Oh yeah, what the tenants have secure biking stalls within the garage. Also, let me see if I can find the lobby floor, ground floor lobby.
And this would apply to the commercial units as well, like even non-residential?
The tenants themselves who operate the retail, if that's what she's addressing.
Yes.
Yes, we would have secure bicycle parking for any of the retail tenants in the garage levels, but we also have like, oops, where we go here. We also have a, outside of an Amazon delivery room, we also have bicycle storage right off the ground floor lobby that's accessible directly from the outside into this level. And you saw in the parking levels, there's all secure parking rooms in the basement levels on all 3 levels. There's quite a bit of bicycle parking because we went to 2 per unit. So we've got close to 200 bicycle stalls.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Vince. Just to jump to another comment, which I'll put to the applicants as well as the planner. But Anonymous asks, if this building is approved, like the one on the southeast corner, will it then set the pattern of meeting the prevailing building height? If anyone can speak sort of to the potential planning context around this.
Well, I think when you say prevailing, did you say sloping height? Did I hear that correctly?
No, prevailing building height. So
Prevailing building height. Okay.
Vince, I think this is something for the city to answer.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Relative to other cities, these are low-rise buildings, but I mean, I chair a panel in Hamilton, and we're getting applications that are much denser than this in a similar scenarios. I don't know what Steve Gauthier has to say about this. Steve, have you got anything to say?
Could you ask the question again?
for sure, Steve. So anonymous, sorry if I'm fading in and I'll try and pull my mic a little closer. Anonymous asks, if this building is approved, like the one on the southeast corner, will it then set a pattern of meeting the quote prevailing building height, end quote?
Well, as mentioned earlier by Gada, the secondary plan allows for consideration of higher heights. We always have to look at the immediate context. We always have to look at the overall context. Would these heights now govern what happens on the rest of Richmond? There's a likelihood that a future building could represent the same build form, the same height, but that's a future. I cannot guarantee, but each and every application, if 9 stories or 8 stories are being sought, would have to be carefully looked at and considered. Like we're in the beginning of the process here. Staff hasn't yet taken a position on the proposal, but of course, if more height is being considered, we pay very close attention on how the public realm is being treated. We pay very good attention on a transition to the existing build forms around. So that's as much as I can answer for this question.
Thank you, Steve.
And I think as Steve was saying, just to piggyback, it's very much a case by case basis, right? And so this is a corner lot. It's a consolidation of 3 contiguous parcels. It's on the traditional Main Street. And so I guess saying that it's a prevailing building height could be a bit of a slippery slope, but really we did look at this site and the context surrounding it and what was most suitable as per the OP and the zoning bylaw. Yeah.
So thanks, Steve and Gada. To jump to another question, Anonymous asks, has there been any wind studies done? And they follow up with when the other building was finished, probably the one on the southeast corner across from you. It definitely made the pedestrian experience worse as you come to the corner. In terms of climate impact, Ottawa's experiencing more and intense storms with high winds being a feature. If anyone can speak to the wind studies being done.
I can speak to that because we read the report after it was done by Gradient Wind, who do probably 90% of the wind studies in Ottawa. And we were concerned ourselves about what would happen at the ground plane, particularly in the pedestrian street level and along both facades of the building. And they came back with a report that said the way we handle the massing of the building basically eliminated any concern for the effect of wind. I know further up the strip where the buildings are closer together across the street from one another, and the massing, the way the building facades were treated in terms of their position relative to the street front, they're closer together. Some of them are higher, and that created a bit of a tunnel effect along the street front. But we do have a full report that indicates that there is no impact. And I also looked at snow loading, what the impact would be again on that. And because we terraced the back of the building, we've actually eliminated any kind of issues with respect to snow.
Perfect. I'm not sure if someone else wants to jump in, but if not, in that case, thank you, Vince. Going to another question from Kathy, and this might be a good one for Jeff as well, who asks, the glebe has conducted a study to accompany the neighborhood secondary plan that establishes a guiding vision to preserve and protect the scale and character of Bank Street. This limits buildings to 4 stories along a certain stretch. Does Westboro Village have anything similar, or could this be considered that would guide development along Richmond Road?
It's a good question, and I was really pleased, obviously, to support the new glebe height and character study. The secondary plan, they have not had a secondary plan, a modern, up-to-date one. Westboro got it about 11 years ago or so, and it calls for 4 to 6 stories along most of the stretch, except at certain key gateways. I don't, and sorry, I should mention that the Glebe's 4-story is partly the result of the narrower right-of-way. So the planners at the city considered that 4 stories would be more appropriate than 6. I guess I've got 2 things on that front. The first of which is the new official plan, which we talk about as if it is any kind of guidance whatsoever. The new official plan has not yet been passed. We have to look at this development through the lens of the current official plan, and to do otherwise is completely inappropriate. But that said, looking at the potential to create a new character study for Westboro Village in the next term of council, the new official plan will be in effect, that calls for 9 stories on commercial main streets. And my guess is that it would be very, very difficult in light of that official plan policy to reduce heights to 4. It would essentially be a down zoning. And then the second question I have is, after being counselor in Kitchissippi for 7 years, working with multiple secondary plans and community design plans, and seeing how often those are not disregarded, but have not served as the certainty that residents and I would have liked to have seen. I question for how long the Glebe study is going to provide certainty in that neighborhood. We have a brand new secondary plan, relatively speaking, for Wellington West. And those of you who are following the 979 Wellington debate will know that council chose to disregard that secondary plan. Many of you, of course, were following the domicile debate on Roosevelt. And I and the community threw almost everything we had into that debate, only to be overturned by the Ontario Land Tribunal. Secondary plans, height and character studies are interesting guidelines, but it looks as though there is always a way in which to assemble a certain group of properties that makes it particularly unique, and with a certain set of policies written in that help the developers to propose something different. I'm not certain that I would want to put a whole lot of work into trying to get the next term of council, the next city council, to downzone Westboro, which is an extremely difficult challenge, and then try to stick to it. What I would prefer to do right now is defend the integrity of the existing secondary plan, which I continue to believe, especially on Richmond Road, was carefully crafted out and continues to be appropriate. Sorry, I'll leave it there. I shouldn't talk out loud.
It's great to talk out loud, I think. Thanks, Jeff. And sorry, I'll reacquaint myself with sort of the order of the questions. I'll just jump to 2 that sort of popped in at the same time, and I'll put this to the owner. But do the 3 properties all have the same owner, i.e. do they all have you as the owner, or are there different owners?
So as of now, we own one of the 3 properties outright, and we have the other 2 under firm contract with closing dates that are scheduled in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, Victor. And I'm going to jump to another anonymous question. I'm not sure if these all are coming from the same person or different people. I'll assume they're different and hope that I'm giving some diversity to the questions. Anonymous asks, has any consideration been given to the fact that the properties in question are the oldest commercial properties and oldest house in Westboro, both dating back over 100 years? Could any attempt be made to preserve some existing historic character? If anyone can answer that.
Good question.
So typically, I can take that. Properties that do have some heritage value, there's a heritage register list that the city of Ottawa has, and these two didn't show up on that list. And even at the pre-consult there wasn't, and which is the first meeting that we had to kind of kick off this project with the city. There was no heritage interest that was demonstrated on the city's part. And so we have kind of taken that liberty and not really preserved any parts of the existing developments on the site right now.
Sorry, I'm not sure if someone else wants to jump in as well. I'll leave it open for a second. Okay. Okay.
Can I just suggest, I mean, as I take a look at the house, I'm not sure, I'm surprised that it's not on the registry, and a full designation would be, difficult to argue for. It's there's clearly not a lot left of the original structure. But that said, I don't think that the residents' question was with respect to preserving any of it, but more of an architectural nod. There's, you're going into a kind of a kitschy vernacular here of these timeless red brick buildings. But there's very little nod to the historical context in which you're building. I would be, as I take a look at the Whispers house, there is something a little bit typical of the neighborhood in how that's built. And you would be hard pressed to see any of that past or history in the architecture that you proposed for the new build. So it's something for you to consider strongly. We can't force you to, but the buildings are starting to look cookie cutter. There are various iterations from really, really shitty designs, as we've seen elsewhere in the ward, to more sophisticated takes on the vernacular, which I think we're seeing here, to be perfectly fair. But there's no nod to the history, and that is a source of continuing discontent and discomfort for the residents of Westboro.
No, that's a good point, Councillor Leeper. I guess what I was trying to say is that it hadn't been brought to our attention as the development team that there was any heritage value. So I mean, I don't want to speak on the owner's behalf, but I'm sure that now that we know that it's there, it could be put into consideration. I mean, that's why these meetings are so useful.
I know that from the feedback from the Urban Design Review panel, there was considerable feedback on treatment of exterior materials, exterior cladding. And so we've undertaken that we're going to be revisiting that. And we'll take that input here as well as part of that.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. To jump to another question, and this is sort of one that's popped up a few times, but if both, Jeff, the planner, applicants want to jump in on this, what is the timeline for starting construction on this project? If, just with the assumption of approvals and everything going to plan, what would be sort of the start to finish approximate timeline on this project?
From the time that we have approval of the project itself, we would at that point go into fairly traditional condo pre-sale period where we would need to achieve a certain percentage of pre-sales in order to qualify for our construction financing. Nominally, we've said that's about a 6-month time period. Who knows what the market will be at that point in time? Maybe we'll blow this out in a week. Maybe it'll take a year. We really don't know. And once we hit that threshold, we'll then look to mobilize the construction, which we expect to take a little over a year to complete. So it's a little bit of a question of how quickly we'll get through this process with the city, but nominally right now we're thinking construction could be as early as 18 months from now.
Are you bringing site plan at the same time as you're bringing zoning?
Yes.
Okay. So we're probably looking, I'm wondering, do you expect to be in front of planning committee before the end of the term of council? So before, are you expecting to be in somewhere around June or so? And maybe that seems aggressive. Like not like you're being, lions.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. September?
Gada, do you have a comment?
So I would say, I think the hopes is by the summer that we would be in front of planning committee. About 6 months. Yeah, I think so. Should be a reasonable timeline.
Okay. I'd be surprised if this was back in front before September, but if you're bringing site plan at the same time, the full approvals will probably take you, close to a year anyways. But I'm not the planner. What do I know?
But if I can jump in, the planning committee date could be as early as this winter, the end of the winter. But that of course is if the all the changes that staff is requesting are made to the proposal. So if that would be the case, there could be a planning committee meeting in March. And then subsequent to that, we would proceed with the site plan approval. And since the circulation is concurrent, if we take into account the preparation of the site plan agreement, there could be another maybe 6, 7, 8 months with site plan agreement registration. But for site plan approval, following March, the site plan approval could happen in the summer.
Okay. Thank you, Steve, Victor, and Jeff. Jeff, I saw you and Mike for a sec, so I'm not sure if you want to jump in again.
I was gonna say I'll believe a March date when I see it, but there it is.
Got it. And sorry, what was attached to one of the questions as well was, will any of the trees be saved? So if you guys would like to maybe speak to your plans for landscaping, especially with regards to trees and what's going to happen to the trees on the property, I think that would be helpful to answer for this resident.
Well, the street trees along Richmond are preserved. There's some trees in the rear yard. Obviously the trees along the rear here are preserved because they're on the other property, but there may be one in this back corner that is adjacent to the ramp down to the garage that we may have to remove. We do have a tree conservation report filed as well. I don't have it handy, so I really can't respond to that, but for the most part though, we're reinforcing Tweedsmuir with new street trees all the way along the frontage. The city has its street tree program in Richmond, so you follow those guidelines. But in the rear yard of the existing residence that's here, I think there's one tree that's in the corner near the ramp that would probably be removed, but we're replacing the whole rear yard is fully landscaped with new trees. All the terraces have trees on them. There's quite a bit of vegetation. There's a heavy landscape plan, as you can see from this image alone, just in the front yard, let alone in the rear yard of this property where the resident amenity areas are. There's quite a bit of reinforcement.
And just sort of to speak to the residents' question as well, if you're curious in looking at that tree conservation report, have you guys, is that up on the DevOps? Yeah, I see it there. So to whoever sort of asked that question, if you want to go on the DevOps link that we posted, and we've got it on the blog as well, you can go into the documents there and you can see the tree conservation report that the applicants have filed. And all the details are also laid out there. Of course, you can also send them the questions, and the planner this question and express your concerns as well. So
any other supporting studies, sorry to jump in stuff, but including the wind study as well would be there as well. If anyone wants to take a look at it, all of the engineering studies that were done, anything else are on DevOps as well.
awesome, yeah. So all there to peruse. And I'll jump to the next question from Anonymous as well, who has asked, and this is more of a city-oriented question, but has any thought been given to having traffic lights installed at Tweedsmuir and Richmond? I imagine this is a Tom-esque question, perhaps.
Yeah, this question could be directed to the transportation consultant.
I'm trying to think if we can shortcut that discussion. I believe the answer is going to be a no. Yeah, just given its proximity to the other lights. I wouldn't be surprised if the answer was no.
In line with what Councillor Leeper had mentioned, is Tweedsmuir is kind of located midway between two existing signals. One of them, a full signal at McRae, and an intersection pedestrian signal at Athlone. The city generally strives for a minimum traffic signal spacing of 200 meters. There are certain instances where they might be a little bit less, but a mid-block location like this, especially with no collision history that would constitute operational concerns, there's no plans for signalization at this intersection.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you, obviously, Jeff, as well. To go to a question from Judy Lincoln as well, who asks, will the commercial spaces remain occupied until the construction begins?
We can't say that definitively. We know, for example, that the owner of Whispers Restaurant, that is the operator of the restaurant, we own the building now, really is tired owner syndrome at this point, has elected to close Whispers effective, I think, the 15th of March. And I think he's got his tickets for a cruise book the very next day. We are talking with folks that would potentially occupy that space. Nothing is definitive at this point. We do have tenants in 255 right now. Again, we don't really control necessarily what happens with all those tenants, whether they will remain in business or not. And while we would endeavor to keep them full, it's obviously to our benefit and to the community's benefit to keep them full. If one was to vacate, say 6 months before start of construction, we would obviously at that point not look to bring a new business in, because it wouldn't make sense.
Got it. Thank you, Victor. I'm not sure if you wanted anyone else to speak to it, but
There's a follow-on question about 372 Tweedsmuir, which is, I guess, related, whether that residential property will be maintained as a residential property until construction. And yes, that would be our intention.
perfect. Thanks. That was going to be the follow-up questions. So we're getting down to some of the last questions that we're seeing. And sort of, I'll put the question to you, Victor, I think, from Tim Gray, which is, will you only be selling to people who now live in Westboro, / is this sort of your target market in this case?
I'll answer it this way. If you pick a vehicle like a Ford Bronco, it's designed for a particular individual, but they'll sell it to your grandmother as well if your grandmother really wants to buy one. So in the same vein, we've designed this building for people that live in Westboro. If someone came from out of town and said, I want to move to Ottawa and I love this location, will we sell them a unit? Absolutely. But we've designed it for the residents of Westboro.
Awesome, got it. And of course, to anybody, this question or any other questions, if you have any follow-up concerns, feel free to put them in the chat. It's where we're getting some room now to answer them. And to go to another question from Kathy, who asks, the new OP, albeit not yet approved, put affordable housing as a key policy direction, especially that close to public transit. While this proposed development doesn't offer any affordable housing, do other high rises in close proximity offer any? And if so, what percentage in each building needs this key priority? So I'm sure Steve and the city, I don't think they'll have that exact percentage on hand, but broadly speaking, maybe that can be answered.
So is that for me?
What?
It can be for you, it can be for Steve. It's a
think the
broad question. I
Yeah, the
realize.
question was how many affordable units are in the buildings around
Yeah,
of the new builds?
yes.
Yeah, so what we've been doing with the new builds is, so we don't have an inclusionary zoning tool yet. So we don't have a way of requiring that a certain percentage of units in transit proximate developments be available for an affordable rate. And we don't yet know what an affordable rate is, and we don't yet know what the percentage is going to be. I would watch in the next couple of months, now that the official plan has been voted in favor of by council, for a consultation to begin on that. So none of the buildings down on Scott Street, none of the buildings that have been going up around Richmond contain a required percentage of affordable housing, because we just haven't had that tool. What I have been doing though is when the buildings are tall enough and dense enough to trigger a Section 37 payment, is I've been asking for a good chunk of that Section 37 payment to go into a ward affordable housing fund. So what our housing branch is telling me is that they are not a big fan of getting 20 years worth of average market rent, which is defined as affordable in a building. They would much prefer to get cash payments that allow them to work with not-for-profit partners on buildings that will be sustainably, deeply affordable. So it is better to have CCOC or Salis or John Howard build a supportive housing development in our ward with money that comes from the Ward Affordable Housing Fund than it is to require a building like this to have 15% of units be affordable for 20 years at something approaching $1,200 a month instead of $1,400 a month if it were a rental. And obviously these units are going to be outside of that price range. When we have inclusionary zoning, we will be using that where the provincial government is allowing us to, which is in protected major transit station areas. So around Tunney's Pasture, around Lincoln Fields, around Bayview Station, those really large ones. But right now we don't have the tools to try to get the affordable housing in. And as a result, Westboro is rapidly becoming out of reach to most residents. The buildings up at Clyde, the dairy plant, are different. In that case, I did choose to negotiate a affordable housing arrangement with the developer because it is such a large development, and we needed to make sure that there was at least some period of affordable housing on top of rents that were already relatively affordable. But around Westboro to the north of Carling, no, we don't have any at this point.
And maybe it might be good to sort of piggyback on that response and get your views, Jeff, on the question from David Morgan on why are we not getting rental options in this part of town, since it all seems to be caught up in the same.
It's funny because I have a different perception of it, right? I think the Main and Main building across the street is rentals. Virtually everything going in on Scott Street is rentals. We know a big chunk of the 335 Roosevelt, if that goes through, will be rentals. I think the Domicile will have some condos in it, but for the past 10 years or so, the bottom has really kind of fallen out of the condo market, only starting to come back now. And so we're starting to see more condos being built, but there's been a real boom in Kitchissippi Ward with respect to rentals. The Carruthers, the McRae. So I have a different perspective on that question. I think the interesting thing for me is why are we now starting to see condos built? And these folks are not the only developer. I know of one other developer in the ward who is looking at doing a condo project to serve very fairly affluent downsizers. So that may be a market that we're starting to see evolve, but the straight condo market is still nowhere near what the rental market is in the ward right now.
And I'm also assigned to several applications in this ward. The one majority of them are for rentals.
It is interesting because the question of rental versus condo is a political consideration. Politicians and residents are sensitive to it, but when it comes to zoning, it's not a consideration. The land use planning doesn't consider what do they call it?
The tenure.
Tenure, thank you. Yeah, the land use planning doesn't consider tenure. So the city doesn't have a tool to sort of say, no, we're not going to approve this unless it's a rental or vice versa. But it is nonetheless a political consideration. So the rental projects tend to get maybe a little bit of an easier ride from the politicians right now, because we are cognizant that, that 1.8% pre-pandemic vacancy rate is about half what a healthy vacancy rate is in a city. Renters are getting screwed. And I think all of the politicians are really glad to see the rental boom in Ottawa, not just in Kitchissippi, but right across the city at the LRT stations especially. The rents will start to come down once 20 years of not building rental housing begins to be addressed. We just don't have the rental stock to take into account the growth that has occurred in Ottawa for the past 20 years, and certainly not enough rental stock to take account of the continued surge of population growth that we expect with immigration. So I'm sorry, I have a different perception of the rental versus condo question. I think Ottawa's moving in a very healthy direction with respect to lots of rental going through, with the exception of some sort of niche higher end products where I'm sure there is the market that Victor and his team are describing.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff and Steve. We got 2 new questions. So KH asks, apologies if this is an inappropriate question, but when is the closing date for 372 Tweedsmuir? Will the current tenants be contacted? So I have no idea what the case might be, but to put the question out there.
I'll take that one. So the actual closing date for the purchase of the properties in the second half of the year, I don't know when the current owners would intend to notify the tenants. From our standpoint, as the new owners, we would aim to give the tenants in the building a 6-month notice of any construction. So I can't speak for the current owners, but that's how we would conduct ourselves.
Thank you, Victor. And to jump back into some of the design and planning questions, Anonymous asks, is it unusual to have the main garage entrance on the quiet side street? Would it not make more sense to have it along Richmond? If perhaps Brad would like to speak to that, or someone else, I'll put it out there.
Well, I can maybe even address it from an owner's standpoint. There is an existing curb cut on Richmond Road, so theoretically that could potentially be grandfathered. We felt it would not be appropriate to mix the pedestrian traffic on Richmond Road with the driveway traffic for the underground parking, and felt it would just be more appropriate to segregate those as much as possible. And we had numerous conversations with our architecture team and with traffic, and that was the conclusion we came to time and again.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I agree that, generally you try to not mix vehicular and pedestrian traffic. Richmond Road is a traditional main street that has an active frontage. Generally, you also, when designing a building, you try to ensure that the access is on the lower classification of street, which in this case would be Tweedsmuir, which is a local street. So local streets are designed for access to developments. Arterial streets are intended to limit the number of access points to enhance features for pedestrians, etc., and not have and to convey traffic along the corridor. So that's why we've elected to put the access on the side street.
Awesome. Thank you both, Brad and Victor. And just a follow-up on another question from way earlier, so I'll sort of reiterate it again. But earlier, Anonymous asked about sort of the prevailing heights on the street, and Steve, I believe you answered that. So he says, or they say, I don't think my question was really answered, other than he said the prevailing item was there. My concern is that if this is approved, it will be the second prevailing height, which could then be used for the next attempt to go beyond 4 to 6. And he'd just like to sort of see how that concern is acknowledged about the sort of the heights going over this 4 to 6 and what it means for, I suppose, future developments.
Well, it will of course be added to the context to be considered. But then again, like Gala explained earlier, it depends on the lot consolidation. It depends on the size of the property that's going to be developed. But of course, it's going to be part of the context. Can we say for sure that it's going to create a precedent? No, but if it could be used as part of the analysis for the context. So if there's a reason why the secondary plan allows for these height to be considered. So they will we will also consider them elsewhere.
Thank you, Steve. And with that, we don't currently have any more questions left in the chat. Still have about 5-10 minutes, so I'm inclined to just, leave it quiet for a minute and we can close up. But if anyone wants to get any last questions out there, now's the time to do so if you'd like to, or if you'd like to follow up on a question. Otherwise, I'll sort of very slowly get the ball rolling on tying this up. Jeff, do you have any comments before I do the ending housekeeping?
No, I would just say, if you're not engaged with the Westboro Community Association, I would certainly encourage you to. I do work closely with the community associations as we work through these developments. The open house is just the beginning of the conversation. Nothing gets sorted out at these, but it does give you a feel for what the development is. The information that you'll need to really engage with this is on the development application site that Stephanie has already pointed you to. The most useful feedback comes in writing, and it's focused and grounded in policy. So send us your emails and questions, and most importantly, let Steve Gauthier, who is on the call, know how you feel about the development. Again, grounding that as much in policy as possible. Steve, I believe, will be passing on various comments to the developer. This will go at some point. You heard Steve and I and Foten chatting about a planning committee vote. At some point, this will go to a vote of planning committee, and then to a vote of City Council, which generally defers to the vote of Planning Committee. And then there is a period of appeal during which either the community or the developer can appeal City Council's development. So if this moves ahead in some form or another, whether I'm successful at getting it reduced or not, we will have a discussion prior to it's actually getting under construction. We call it a pre-construction meeting to talk about the specifics of, where our truck's going to go and how long is the construction going to be and what are the hours, etc. I'm anticipating it will be at least probably 1.5 years before we have that meeting, but it may come sooner. And a lot of those details are simply unknown to the developer right now until they bring a contractor on board to build the building and can start to look at some of those details. So your job over the next several weeks is to provide Steve with the most focused kind of feedback you can. Steve's job is going to be to take all the feedback that he hears and make a recommendation to the planning committee as to whether or not we should recommend or approve this building. So I will just leave it there. And Steph, sorry, thank you. Back to you.
No, I think you captured it. And to piggyback on your comments, I put in the chat, we've heard in the past that you cannot copy paste the chat, which is a problem. But please send your feedback to Steve Gauthier. His email is in the chat if you want to take the time to type it or write it down now. I'll speak in dead space to give you the time to do that. And then you can follow up with our office as long as you get it to Jeff at jeff.leeper@ottawa.ca. It'll end up in his hands and likely my hands as well, and we'll be able to keep up with your feedback. It's all in the chat there if you want to get it down now. Hopefully I took enough time there to make sure everyone could grab it. So with that, and not seeing any other questions, so you can always shoot off any follow-up questions to us and we'll get it to the right person. We'll wrap up for now. The recording will go up shortly this week, so look out for that if you'd like it or anyone who will like it. Have a lovely evening, everyone, and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Victor, thanks to you and your team.
Well, thank
Have
you.
a good night, everyone. Thank you very much, and enjoy your holidays if you are taking some. Good night.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everyone.
Have a good evening.